This is a special Sunday for me. So I wanted to talk to all of you about how thankful I am for all of y'all. On this Sunday, 3 years ago, something special happened. You may already know the story, but I want to remind you how this fellowship, Community Church of the Hills, played an integral part in my family's life and in God's plan. And I spoke with Lonnie and Sharon Riddell a little bit to give you a little bit of history of our church, and then I'll tell you why today is so special. Around 1983, this church was founded. Now, Lonnie has all the records in his attic, and he has promised me he's going to go up in that attic and find the actual day that the foundation of this place was laid. But the best that I can discern is that this church was founded around 1983, or he said when Beverly Veron gets back, she'll know. And she's getting back in about a month or so, from what I understand. Anyway, this is how it all began. A number of people were going to another church in town, and the church would bring in a pastor every few years or so. And the pastor that was brought in at the time didn't teach orthodoxy. And the friends and families who were there, they went through the proper channels. They talked to the pastor. After they talked to the pastor, and the pastor said, well, we live in a multicultural society. There's many ways to Jesus, and the Bible is just one way. Then they went to the denominational heads, and they were rebuffed then. And then they made the only decision that godly people can do when the Bible is compromised. They decided they had to leave that church. And they did it in what I think was a really gracious way. They didn't all leave in one block group. They left a few at a time. After praying, after this is over months of time, they ended up leaving. But they had no place else to go in town. So they ended up meeting at the Riddell's house. 4 people. 4 people. Now I'm going by Lonnie's history of this, and the history may be a little bit different, but 4 of them met, they prayed, they had Bible study, and then they ultimately met at the public pool in town for their church. And after that, they hired a few pastors, and they had Pastor Art Stark, another man named Larry Harvey, Jimmy Boatwright, Kyle Roberts, Michael Meek, and then Dan Carney. And I counted those. Those were 6 pastors. I'm the 7th, and that is God's number of completeness. It's kind of interesting because this fellowship is responsible for 2 church plants. Did you know that? About 15 years ago, when Jimmy Boatwright was here, there were some just disagreements, and he planted a church across town. That was 20 years after this church was founded. And it's interesting because of that church plant was so successful, there were only 8 people left in the congregation. So I did the math. They started with 4 in a house, and 20 years later, they had 8 in this church, which means they doubled in numbers. God was moving. And then they had another pastor, and the congregation, there's something that they had in common as I talked to all the elders, is that the pastor would come, there was an initial round of enthusiasm, the congregation would grow, and then the congregation would subside. They'd bring in another pastor, the pastor, because the congregation would get low, they'd leave, and then they'd bring in another pastor, would grow a little bit, and it would go down, and it went like that. Now, my family and I, in 2013, I got a call from God to move to Texas. And I met with a friend at the church that I was at, Hope Chapel, Hermosa Beach, and a man had already moved to Dripping Springs, and we were really good friends, and he came down to move the rest of his family back, and I had one last lunch with him, and I had lunch with him. He talked about how great Dripping Springs was, and how they needed evangelical pastors, and that I really ought to move. And he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, Steve, you've been trained with pay here at Hope Chapel for 15 years. It's time for you to move. And all I can say is there was a strange warming in my heart. Not unlike the one that John Wesley felt when he was called. And I was at one time afraid and at the other time a bit exhilarated, but nevertheless, I said to my pastor, for many years I was never leaving Hope Chapel. This is my church, and there's no way in heck am I ever going to plant a church. Never! Because we live in a post-Christian society, and churches just aren't thriving anymore. People are leaving the church in droves. There's no way, but God called me. After much prayer, after much counsel, I ended up moving with my family in 2013. I arrived in Dripping Springs on September 29th, 2013. We started a little church behind El Rey Mexican Restaurant, if you know where that's at, on the west side of town, in a little strip center. And, you know, we had about 150 visitors the first year, but no one stuck. It was tough. We had YouTube worship. We didn't have a worship leader. It was hard. And traditionally, the way you're supposed to plan a church according to all church models is you have 4 home groups going. You get a home group and then another one, you get 4. When you have a core group of people, then you go and you move into a building. Well, I met a friend there, pastor, his name was Jeff from Gateway Hill Country. And he says, oh, you're in Texas, Steve. You can't do it that way because in Texas, a church is a building. I went, what? Because the people are the church. No, but he says in Texas, you got to have a building. So I ended up renting out this little space. We had it. People came and went. Ultimately, after about a year and a half, we had 12 people, counting my family. And I was being supported by my church in California, and my support was running out in 6 months. So I go, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I guess God's calling me out of ministry. So in April of 2015, I met Bill Veron. We went to a play. My family and I went to a play to see my daughter in. I met Bill. I found out he was my neighbor, lived right down the road. He was an elder of this church, and we got along. Everyone gets along with Bill and Beverly. Have you noticed? I don't think there's anyone who doesn't. No, there isn't anyone who doesn't like them. But we hit it off, and I thought about this. And then we're still preaching. The church isn't growing. And I go, gosh, what's going to happen? In 6 months, I'm going to be unemployed. What am I going to do? And then on June 28th of 2015, we had a congregant who was going to our church. He says, by the way, Pastor Steve, my old church, Community Church of the Hills, he had gone here before. In fact, I think everybody in Johnson City has gone here at one time. And he says, the pastor of our old church just quit. I went, really? Okay, this is June 28th. So I ended up calling Bill about that. Said, hey, I understand your church just quit. Church over here isn't working out. What do you think? He goes, well, that's great. I think we got to interview, but I'm in Alaska. He's in Alaska. He's always in Alaska. But why don't you meet with Joe and another elder, and they'll interview you. And so I interviewed with them. The interview went well. It was supposed to be for maybe 20 minutes. We met for 3 hours. And then I had a decision to make. They said, well, we'll try out. We'll have you come and preach for a little bit and see how well you do. Well, I had a decision to make. I had this small congregation in Dripping Springs, and I had this new opportunity to preach. And this was going to be on the second week of July in 2015. But there's this account in the Old Testament where the Israelites are being overrun by their enemies and they can't eat. And in fact, they're cannibalizing each other. It's so bad. The siege is so bad against Israel. They don't know what to do. But there are 4 lepers who make it outside the city gates. And they say, let's go to the enemy and see if we can make peace. If they kill us, we die. If we stay here, we die. So why don't we just go over there and see what happens? So as they went over to the enemy's camp, they found the enemy's camp was completely decimated. No one was there, and they plundered their enemies. That was my dilemma. I go, well, if I stay here in this little church in Dripping Springs, we're going to die. If I go over there, who knows what will happen? Either way, I'm going to die here, or maybe I'll die there. Well, as it turns out, I came here, we preached for about 8 weeks, and then they took the vote. Now, I didn't know that they were in between pastors. I knew they were in between pastors, but the pastor quit. But Joe told me that they were 2 weeks away from shutting the doors here because the pastor left and the congregation did what they had been doing, and they had been leaving. And so I came here, and preached for 8 weeks, and people started coming back. And then the last week of August, the last Sunday of August, this day, 3 years ago, they took a vote, and I'm thankful to say you voted me in. Thank you very much. 98% vote. Only one person said no. But Joe said the person didn't count because she didn't really go here. So we'll say that's good. So I'm really thankful for that. So today, what happened was I was here, and then guess what? The same thing happened. People left. They left just like every other time. They left. But I told Joe and I told the elders there's a big difference between me and the other pastors. And as much as I'm able to do this according to God's Holy Spirit, I says, they quit when the people left. I'm not going to quit. You're going to have to fire me. Okay? That might be a possibility, but I said I'm not going to quit. God has called me here. I'm going to stay here, and let's see what God will do. And over the course of time, people left, but God also filled it back in with everyone who's here today, and we're only missing maybe 8 people today. And y'all have been faithful. I mean, he did a work. I believe that we are seeing the first fruits of what the original elders of this congregation had in mind. Understand, they've waited 35 years for something to happen in this fellowship. And one disappointment after another, one disappointment after another. And I hope not to disappoint. We've had our ups and downs. Oh, trust me, we've had some knockdown, drag-out fights in my office. Haven't we, Joe? No. You say, no, he's a good elder. Bill, haven't we? And we've settled and we've come to terms and we've worked things out because that's how we do it. We work things out as brothers and sisters. And God willing, you know, when I went back there and people said, are you coming home? And I said, no, my home is here. I really mean it. God has called me here. And I have experienced, and my family has experienced great, great trials and tribulations. Most of you know what those are. And if you don't know, you can ask me personally afterwards. But I love you guys. I'm thankful for y'all. Never did I think I'd ever leave California. Never did I think I would be in this church. Never did I think there'd still be people in this church. But you have been faithful as well. And all I know how to do is just to preach the word. In season and out of season. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm also a pastor who believes in spurring one another on to love and good works. You're not going to come here and always hear a feel-good message. No, I want you to feel bad, but feel good that Jesus is in your life. And I want you to feel good because Jesus is in your life. And I believe that we can do something for the kingdom of God. If not for anything else, to fulfill the vision of the 4 elders and their wives' vision to see this church thrive for Christ's sake. So that's a little bit of history that we have for this church. And that's why I read this passage today from the Apostle Paul. And that's why I'm thankful for all of you.